How many of you here will forget Eduardo Mondlane of Mozambique? How many of you will forget Samora Moises Machel of Mozambique? When we went to Namibia, we had other people, younger people, they did not have to go to school. How many will forget Sambu Yoma and Andimba Hamantoivo ya Toivo? And how many of us will forget that even in Angola, we had young people, and I say they were young because they were in their 30s and 20s. How many of you will forget that at that time, we had younger people in Angola? How many of you will forget Agostino Neto, Jonas Malheiro Savimbi, and Holden Roberto, among others? And it did not stop there. And you know, there was a debate in the 1960s as to who is an African. And it was argued in those early days by the school of Senegalese called Samba Sanyang, that in order to be an African you must have a black skin. But there was another school, the school of the Osage for Dr. Kwame Nkrumah and Leopold Sedar Senghor of Senegal. And they took the view with which I associate myself, that black skin in and of itself does not constitute one an African. That what constitutes one an African is his or her desire to live like an African and to love the continent of Africa. I can therefore confirm to you that I know many black-skinned men and women who are not Africans. And that I know many white and brown-skinned individuals who are as African as they come. And therefore, when this evening I am constituted into Chief Tamba Taylor of Liberia, I'm a very happy man. My only wish is that being constituted into a chief will also entitle me to land in Liberia. And that I shall have my own land and I shall build my own house here in Liberia. I also take this opportunity to thank all of us who are gathered here this evening to remind ourselves that the reason why we are gathered here is because young Liberians who desire to see their country realize her potential decided to invite a fellow African to talk about the need for peace as a prerequisite to the realization of political, economic, and social development. And therefore, when I have the opportunity to speak to you this evening, I must remind myself that I am in a country of history, the country of Liberia, the land of liberty. I must remind myself that this country did not exist since the year 1847. This country existed since the creation of man. And what happened in 1847 is that a government was instituted here in Liberia, and that government is the government that we are talking about, and how it has succeeded or failed in the struggle to create an environment where Liberians can realize their potential. I remember as a young boy in Kenya, in my classes of history and civics, when I heard the name of President Tubman of Liberia, I remember so very vividly that at that time, only 2 African countries had not been colonized, Liberia and Ethiopia. And I remember so very well in those early days, as we said in the morning, Liberia became the political mecca of many a leader who are leading the struggle for independence. I remember that in those early days, if you wanted to lead Africa, you had to come to Liberia. If you ask the Nigerians, their own Dr. Nnamdi Azikiwe was here. If you ask the Ghanaians, their own Diosajefo, Kwame Nkrumah was here. If you ask the Guineans, their own Ahmed Seko Toure was here. If you ask the people of Guinea-Bissau, their own Amilcar Cabral Abel-Jassi was here. There is a sense in which Liberia was the fountain from which all leaders drank, and the mother's milk of African independence and revolution was consumed by those leaders in this very historic city of Monrovia. It therefore gladdens my heart that several years down the line, I have both the privilege and honor of being present in Monrovia, of being present in Liberia, to share with you my thoughts on what I think can catapult Liberia into the orbit of civilization alongside other nations and other civilizations. I have no doubt in my mind that this country can be a great country, that indeed this country is a great country which we only need to make greater. You know, as I said in the morning, when Liberia was being conceived in the manner that we know it today, in the United States of America, those who thought about her had already had their own experience. You will remember that the United States of America was colonized. And you will remember that that day in Philadelphia, in the year 1776, when the 13 original states met in Philadelphia, and they came out with the American Declaration of Independence. And you remember those eternal words that defy both geography and history and time, when the Declaration of Independence said, we hold all truth to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and that governments are instituted amongst men, that they may secure these rights by the consent of the people, and that if any government were to go against these rights, then it becomes the people, the right of the people to abolish that government. At that time, even when they said all men were created equal, it is not true that they were equal. The women in the United States of America did not have the right to vote until the year 1908. The persons of color did not have the right to vote until in states such as Alabama in 1963. And we can hear the voice of Martin Luther King speaking in 1963 that even in Alabama, where the lips of its governor reeks with the words of nullification and interposition, that even there, one day the sons of the former slaves and the sons of the former slave owners will sit together in the table of brotherhood. So we have come from a long tradition, and that tradition recognizes that young men and women must participate in the creation of their own nation. So today, when we are assembled here as Africa, in order to look to the future, we must remind ourselves of where we came from as a people. And I said this morning, and I repeat it again, that in 1884, Africa was innocent. Africa was innocent in the south. The Zulus roamed free in southern Africa, as did the Xhosa, they roamed free. In Namibia, the Herero roamed free, as did the Ovambo. In East Africa, the Kikuyu and the Luo of Kenya were free. In the Central African Republic and in Congo, the Bangala and the Kasai were free, and the Luba. In this part of the world, the Malinke knew no borders. The Yoruba knew no borders. The Igbo knew no borders. The Hausa and Fulani knew no borders. Then some gentlemen, there were no ladies in that assembly, sat in Berlin, in Germany, and without any due regard to our cultural realities, they divided Africa amongst themselves. The Germans took over what we now call Dahomey. They took over Rwanda and Urundi in East Africa and Tanganyika. And they took over Southwest African Republic, which we now call Namibia. They only lost them after the World War I. The British had their share. They took Gold Coast, which we now call Ghana. They took Nigeria, which was named by the girlfriend of Lord Lugard. They took Zambia. They took Malawi, which they called Nyasaland. They had the audacity to call one country now called Zambia, Northern Rhodesia, and the other one that we now call Zimbabwe, they called Rhodesia. And it did not stop there. The Portuguese, a little country, which is the sick man of Europe in many ways, took Angola. They took Mozambique, and they were not satisfied. They came here in the western part of West Africa and took Guinea-Bissau and Cape Verde. And they did not stop there. Even the little country Brussels, through the cunning and ingenuity of King Leopold, took the Democratic Republic of Congo, 80 times larger than Belgium, and converted into a colony. And they did not stop there. The French had their share. The French came here, they took Benin, they took Togo, they took Gabon, they took Mauritania, they took Mali, and they did not stop there. They went to Niger, they went to Upper Volta, which we now call Burkina Faso, and they did not stop there. They went to Chad, they went to Central African Republic, they went to Algeria, they went to Tunisia, they went to Morocco. They took it all. So, and nobody was left out in this struggle. The Spaniards also had their little sliver of land. They took Equatorial Guinea. By the time that they were through with us, we of the Negroid blood had been so thoroughly disrupted, so thoroughly debased, that Frantz Fanon says that the African had been thingified. He had become a thing without rights as men. So to claim even at that time that all men were born equal, it was not true. In fact, a few years later in South Africa, a Dutch immigrant called Hendrik Verwoerd, instituting the apartheid regime, said that Africans were only fit for one thing, as drawers of water and hewers of wood for the white folks. That is the state of the African that we are talking about. So we went through the period of colonization. You and me did not have the right to vote. You and me did not have the right to participate. And then a group of young Africans started emerging. And after the World War II, the international community sitting in the United States of America decided that we had to decolonize. A Europe that was pounded after the World War II. Sometimes I think it was not a world war, it was our tribal war of European tribes. But they called it a world war anyway. And what then happened is that young men and women from Africa started to agitate for independence. And it started very early, sometimes we forget. In 1912, the oldest political party in black Africa was formed in South Africa by Sir Albert Luthuli, the African National Congress. And no sooner had it been founded that we had yet another party in South Africa, the Pan-African Congress of Robert Sobukwe. Africans were beginning to rise because they believed that they had to participate, and they were young Africans. And it did not stop there. It was not only Mandela who later in the 1960s were leading the struggle. There was Walter Sisulu. Without the advantage of education, there was Govan Mbeki, and many others like Oliver Reginald Tambo. And we remember all of them. In the Portuguese land, we had young men and women also rising. How many of you here will forget Eduardo Mondlane of Mozambique? How many of you will forget Samora Moises Machel of Mozambique? When we went to Namibia, we had other people, younger people. They did not have to go to school. How many will forget Sambu Yoma and Andimba Hamantoivo ya Toivo? And how many of us will forget that even in Angola, we had young people, and I say they were young because they were in their 30s and 20s. How many of you will forget that at that time, we had younger people in Angola? How many of you will forget Agostino Neto, Jonas Malheiro Savimbi, and Holden Roberto, among others? And it did not stop there. It did not stop there, because in Zambia we had Kenneth David Kaunda. In the Democratic Republic of Congo, the man for whom I am named, Patrice Emery Lumumba, who was leading the struggle. In Tanzania, Julius Kambarage Nyerere. In Uganda, Apollo Milton Obote. And in Kenya, Jomo Kenyatta. And of course, when you came to the West, you had in Nigeria great people, the great Nnamdi Azikiwe, the Tafawa Balewa, and the Sahadana of Sokoto, Sah Ahmadu Bello. In Ghana, you remember Kwame Nkrumah, the Osajefo, and you will remember Leopold Sedar Senghor of Senegal, Modibo Keita of Mali, and Ahmed Ben Bella of Algeria, and many others who are rising at that time. The reason why we have to remind ourselves of this history is because history teaches us that if you do not have a sense of history, you cannot have a sense of the future. So we must never forget that there were great Africans who were fighting at that time. And they were fighting that we may regain our dignity. And the reason why that is important, this country, this Monrovia, became the political homage for those leaders. I've already said it and I repeat it again. The Osaje for Kwame Nkrumah was here. I have said it and I repeat it again. Nnamdi Azikiwe was here. I say it and I repeat it. Haile Selassie was here. I say it and I repeat it. Ahmed Sekou Toure was here. Modibo Keita was here. Shaka Stevens was here. They were all here. David Dako was here. They were here. Patrice Emery Lumumba was here. Because this is where you drank the fountain of freedom. Was the place. So today, we must remind ourselves why it is that we attained our political independence. I remember in the month of March in 1957, in Accra, Ghana's Osaje for Kwame Nkrumah, in the struggle for independence, told the Ghanaians and the fellow Africans at that time, seek ye first the political kingdom, and the rest shall be given unto you. His clarion call was that we should gain our independence as the foundation stone upon which we can gain economic liberation and social cohesion. And after 1957, when he said, Ghana is free, it shall never be colonized again, He went to Casablanca in Morocco and repeated the same thing. But it was only in 1963, on the 25th day of March to be exact, in Addis Ababa, in the presence of 32 leaders of the then independent African leaders. Your leader, Tubman, was there, and he gave a speech. He's one of the 32 who gave a speech. And all of them were unanimous that Africa must unite. But the most animated was the Osagyefo Kwame Nkrumah. The Osagyefo said, we must not leave this hall in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, without one African government. We must not leave here without one African army. We must not leave here without a single African passport. We must not leave here without a single African currency. I'm prepared to stand down as the president of Ghana. Let us create a country before we each get used to the trappings of power and independence, because the colonial master is not asleep. He will divide us and will never unite. Unfortunately, nobody listened to the Osagyefo. And as a result, instead of an African Union, we ended up with an Organization of African Unity, which many historians described appropriately that it was merely an annual jamboree of dictators, a toothless bulldog which did very little. And you and me know that no sooner had we attained political independence than the colonial masters started agitating and plotting against the leaders of the day. Many of you, and I encourage you to read Luda de Vet's The Assassination of Patrice Emery Lumumba. On that day, when without warning or without inclusion in the day's program, he emerged from the crowd and gave a speech which will never be forgotten. He said, among other things, that the beauty of what is happening today is that from this day henceforth, the history of Congo will be written by the Congolese. And Congo will be governed by the Congolese. 9 months later, they killed him. A few years later, in Togo, they killed Sylvanus Olympia. A few years later, in Mali, they removed Modibo Keita. A few years later, they removed Nnamdi Azikiwe and killed Tafawa Balewa and the Sowedoner of Sokoto. A few years later, they killed Ahmed Ben Bella. A few years later, they overthrew the Osagyefo. A few years later, they tried to kill Sekou Touré. A few years later, they killed Amilcar Cabral. They were in the killing spree. And they were mounting coup d'etats. And yet when they sat, they were saying that coups are as frequent as breakfast in Africa. But at that time, even breakfast was not frequent. Because Africa was not producing. So that today when we sit here as young Liberians, and we are thinking about an election, and we are thinking about peace, we should ask ourselves, what is our role in that peace? How is it that your country with so much promise, founded in 1847, continues to punch below her economic weight? How is it that your country, founded in 1847, continues to punch below her political weight? How is it that your country, founded in 1847, does not know social cohesion? And Liberia is Africa in microcosm. Because indeed in Congo is the same thing. Because indeed in Central African Republic it is the same thing. Because in Sudan it is the same thing. Every election period in Africa threatens the nation because many Africans do not understand why they seek political office. In many African countries, individuals seek political office because it gives them an opportunity to steal from the people. It gives them an opportunity to acquire wealth that they do not deserve. It gives them an opportunity, in the words of Fan Boulay, to engage in theft of industrial proportions. It gives them an opportunity to engage in kleptomaniac behavior. It gives them an opportunity to abuse the people whom they serve. It gives them an opportunity to rape their countries. And you Liberians have witnessed that. You Liberians have witnessed it firsthand. You Liberians have entertained leaders whose only claim to fame is that they were murderers. You Liberians have entertained leaders and endured individuals who had no business leading Liberia. You Liberians have gone through a civil war. You Liberians have known pain firsthand. You Liberians have known destruction firsthand. And you Liberians are not out of the woods. The UN is still here, alive and well, as the guarantors of peace. You have had the advantage in the recent past of electing an individual in the name of Johnson Sirleaf, who to our credit has presided over a government that is reasonably stable. She may not in that government have achieved all that you desire. It may be very true that that government still suffers the African disease of cronyism and nepotism and corruption. But that notwithstanding, we must also acknowledge that that government has preserved peace. We must also acknowledge that that government has provided opportunities. We must, in the nature of things, in the words of John Garang, when man is given an opportunity to serve, man can never govern guiltlessly. But at the end of the day, history counts whether the credits are more than the negatives. And I want to submit to you that when history is written, it will be said of this administration that it is going to preside over an election and has the possibility for the first time of presiding over a peaceful transfer of power. In other words, with all the shortcomings, history will remember this government with a little charity and with fondness. So today, we are gathered here to remind ourselves that we have a duty as young Liberians. We have a duty to remember that throughout the ages, men have protected their countries. And in my argument, men includes women. They have protected their countries because they know that motherland must be protected, not for this generation only, but for generations yet to be born. If you permit me a little latitude and permit me to look at history and to look at the world, throughout history, it is young men and women who have risen to the occasion. In 1908, in the then Ottoman Empire, when the empire was under threat, it is the so-called Young Turks who came out and protected the Ottoman Empire. Of course, history will accuse them of having committed the massacre of the Armenians, which is being debated today. But out of the effort of the young Turks, you and me know that the modern nation of Turkey was created by Atatürk. It was young men. Young men have always contributed positively to history. You and me will remember in 1963 when Americans of color were being discriminated against. It was a young Martin Luther King Jr. It was a young Reverend Jimmy Young. It was a young Jesse Jackson. It was a young Malcolm X who are in the forefront of the struggle against discrimination in Alabama and Mississippi. And we remember Rosa Parks. In other words, young men and women are the ones who make changes in the world. And it did not stop there. In 1958, when France was in trouble and they called Charles de Gaulle back to power, it was young people who came. And in 1968, during the student riots, it was young French men and women who were in the forefront of preserving France for that generation and generations yet to be born. And if you think that that kind of history is too deep into history, in the 1980s in South Korea, it is young men and women who are in the streets. And in China, in Tiananmen Square, it is the young men and women who enforced changes during the reign of Deng Xiaoping. And it did not stop there. It went on. Much more recently in Africa, we have seen the Arab Spring. We have seen Tunisian government which was corrupt tumble. We have seen the thieving government of Hosni Mubarak tumble because young men were rising and playing their part. You young Liberians, how do you want history to remember you? Because history has a way of remembering people in two different ways. And there are two different ways of getting into history. In Greek mythology, we are told that there was a young man who, having done nothing throughout his life, the young man was called Herostratus. On the day that he wanted to be remembered in history, he burnt a cathedral that he may be remembered. Do you want to burn modern day cathedral that you may be remembered? No, you must not. Because there is another way of getting into history. The way of Alexander the Great, who died at age 33. And he said of Alexander the Great that on the day of his death, he said that a coffin should be made with his hands outstretched, and that his coffin should be carried by doctors to demonstrate to the world that no matter who you are, when death comes, even the intervention of the doctors, you die in spite of the intervention. And his outstretched and empty hands to show the thieving leaders of Africa that you live with nothing. So there is a sense in which you Liberians must choose now how you want to be remembered. I have no doubt in my mind that this country, like most African countries, deserve better. But this thing that we call peace, what is peace? What is it? Because we are fond of equating the absence of war with peace. That is not peace. If you allow me a little spirituality, Jesus of Nazareth says, peace I give you. The peace that surpasses all understanding. For those of you who are Muslims, Ramadan Kareem. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, says that when you wake up and greet somebody, say Assalamu alaikum. Let peace be upon you. Among the Hindu, Lord Krishna says that the only time when you are to go into war, when you have exhausted the avenue of peace, but even then, after war, you must sue for peace. The great Mahatma Gandhi says, there is no way to peace, peace is the way. So the question is, what is peace? Do we want the peace of the graveyard, where there is total silence? That is not the peace I'm talking about. I'm talking about the peace that rests on the pedestal of justice. The peace that ensures that you young Liberians live in a country where you have opportunity to serve your country. where you are judged not by your ethnic extraction, but by your ability. I look for that kind of peace. I look for the kind of peace that is predicated upon justice, that when you work, you earn by the sweat of your brow. I look to the peace that ensures that in all the 15 counties of Liberia, there are opportunities for young men and women, that young Liberians do not have to swim across the Mediterranean Sea into Malta to go into modern slavery in Europe. I look forward to the peace that does not give young Liberians an opportunity to be humiliated at the embassy of the United States of America as you look for the green card. I look forward to the peace that does not allow you to go to the embassy of Australia or the United Kingdom or any one of these European countries in order to be humiliated that you may go and flip hamburger. I am suggesting to us that that peace can only be achieved when we have men and women in the political class who know that politics and service are one. That those who know that when you seek political office, you seek political office for the sake of service. You know, it is the great Indian nationalist, Chakravarti Rajagopalachari, who said, when politics stumbles, the country pays. So we must have hygiene in our politics. We must sanitize our politics. The men and women in Liberia, and there is no shortage of men and women in Liberia, who are now seeking to be the presidents of Liberia. As I drove through the streets of Liberia and Monrovia, I was shown the cars that they want to unleash to the unsuspecting electorate. They will be visiting every village and every hamlet, making all promises known and unknown to man. Saying that they will make manna fall from heaven. They will claim that they will build bridges where there are no rivers. They'll claim that they will make bread without dough. They'll claim that they'll make ice without water. They'll make many claims and mask them. And ask them, we don't want to be given cock and bull stories. We simply want our hospitals to work. We want our land to be tilled. We want our children to go to school. We want to buy food that is grown in Liberia. We don't want to eat chicken from Brazil. We do not want to drink water from Europe. It can't be done. Ask them how they are going to achieve that. But I also want you to ask them another question. Are you loyal to Liberia? Ask them this question. Do you hold the citizenship of another country? And if they hold the citizenship of another country, then they are not fit to be the president of Liberia. I am saying that in all seriousness, because is it not Christ of Nazareth who says, where your treasure is, that is where your heart is. So if your treasure is in the United States, that is where your heart is. If your treasure is in Australia, that is where your heart is. If your treasure is in the United Kingdom, that is where your heart is. So let your treasure be in Monrovia. Let your treasure be here, so that your heart can be here. Let us know that your family is here. Let it not be that this is a hunting ground where you come to catch the antelope and take the meat to the United States or other capitals. Liberia is not a hunting ground. But yet I must tell you that throughout the ages, and I said this in the morning, when you are speaking to those in power, when they wield power, you must do so with wisdom. You must not speak with the arrogance that inflames the anger, but you must speak with the firmness that opens the eyes. And I said in the morning, and I liberally quoted the Bible, and I will do so again, that throughout the ages there have always been two ways of addressing kings. That there is the way of John the Baptist, where John the Baptist goes out and tells Herod, "Oh Herod, you adulterer, you've taken Herodias, your brother's wife. When you do that, Herod will arrest you. Herod will imprison you. Then a young girl who is the daughter of Herod called Salome will dance. When Salome has danced, she will be told, whatever you ask for, I will give you." Then Salome's mother will say, "I want the head of John the Baptist, and you will be killed." The question is, do you want to be John the Baptist? Are you suicidal? Or you want to live a little longer, that you may see and enjoy the dividends? There are occasions when it is good to be John the Baptist, but there is another way of dealing with the king. It is the Nathan way. Because history tells us in the book of Samuel in chapter 12 that there was a prophet called Nathan, and that he went to David and said, "Oh David, there is injustice in your land. There is a person who is a very rich man with many animals, and there is another poor person with only a lamb. And this man with many animals takes his only lamb and slaughters it." And David gets very agitated and angry and said, "Who is that he may be punished fourfold?" And he tells him, "Oh David, that man is you. That man is you because you have taken the wife of Uriah the Hittite, and you have killed Uriah by the sword of the Ammonites, and taken his wife Bathsheba. The sword shall never leave your house." But yet there is a sense in which, in the case of Nathan, it is David who accused and punished himself. So we must be discerning and do that which is good and right. You young people, you must remember the Chinese have a saying, when you don't have an answer, ask the youth, they know everything. It is not meant to be a compliment. It is meant to suggest that sometimes in the exuberance of our youth, we think that we have the monopoly of knowledge. But is it not true that those who arrogate to themselves the monopoly of knowledge often lead their countries through a shortcut to chaos? I'm submitting to us that we must be discerning. Use your youth and your exuberance to go out into rural Liberia. You, Mr. President of the Federation of Liberia Youth, go out there. Speak to your constituency. Tell them that it's big business. There are men and women who are coming here to sell things to us. There are men and women who have stolen in Monrovia, and they are coming here to give us as gifts what they have taken out of our taxes. Interrogate them. Ask them what their salaries were, and by what magic they have become millionaires, that we may also become millionaires. When you have gone into that area, tell the people to interrogate them. And you, the president of Young Ambassadors for Peace, also go to another part of Liberia and tell the Liberians, both men and women, that the time has come to make a decision. Because as I said, there is always a decision time. In the Bible, which I must quote liberally because it is the holy month of Ramadan, there is a time when the Israelites want to go to the promised land like you want to go to the promised land. And the prophet Joshua says, "Choose you now whom you shall serve, the Lord God or the Lord of the Amorites. As for me and my house, I shall serve the Lord." But he did not start there. The prophet Elijah had had this confrontation with the prophets of Baal, the 450 of them. And he told them, Let us today make a decision. If God is God, let us worship God. And if Baal is Baal, let us worship Baal. That is what we are confronted with. Because they are latter-day Baals who want to be worshipped, who have money and they think that they are God's gift to us, yet they are cursed to us. We must unmask and remove the masks so that we only give the opportunity to men and women who can serve. You young men and women, you crusaders for peace, go out there, sing to their hearts. Is it not true that throughout the ages, when we have been in trouble, we have always sung? Is it not true that it's in music that we sing? Is it not true that it's the music that evokes in us an emission? Is it not true that several years ago they said and they sang by the rivers of Babylon, there we sat down, there we wept as we remembered Zion. We too must sit down and remember Monrovia. We too must sit down and remember Liberia. We too must sit down and remember that our iron ore is going without being processed. We too must sit down and must remember that our timber is being taken away. We too must sit down and remember that our rubber is being taken away. We too must remember that the Chinese are coming here and they are taking over. We too must remember that we have a stake in this country. We too must remember that we must not deal with people on the basis of exploitation, but on the basis of cooperation and on the basis of trade. Yes. I said in the morning, and I'm repeating it again, that in the table of civilization, there are only two ways of sitting at the dinner table of civilization. You are either a diner or a waiter. For too long, we of the Negroid blood, we have been at the dinner table as waiters, not as diners. And I'm submitting to us that even we Liberians have been at the dinner table as people to be exploited. Time has come that we must have dividends. The dividends of our labor, the dividends of our tax. And let me tell you, it is not going to come on a silver platter. Throughout the ages, people have always fought for it. Throughout the ages, people have always struggled for it. Throughout the ages, there is no gain without pain. Throughout the ages, there is no result without effort. Throughout the ages, there are no miracles. If you seek that which is under the bed, you must bend. You can't say abracadabra and it jumps up. It will never happen. So, ladies and gentlemen, today is a great day. It is a great day because you Liberians are making a solemn vow that there shall never be civil war in Liberia. You are making a solemn vow that the electoral period in Liberia will always be an occasion for a competition of ideas, and that a good idea shall prevail over a bad idea. You are making a solemn vow that whether you are Muslim or Christian or Jew or Gentile or Kisi or whichever ethnic group, it does not matter. Because I remember so very vividly in 1947, Mahatma Gandhi, when asked about the divisions in India, he said, as a young man in Gujarati, I went to the temple one day, and the preacher in my temple read from the Hindu Gita through to the Muslim Quran, through to the Jewish Torah, and through to the Christian Bible, as if it did not matter which book was being read as long as God was being worshipped. And I'm submitting to us that our diversity is our strength. I submit to us that God is a God of diversity. He has put us together, Muslim, Christian, and alike, that we may serve this great country. Let us make it great. Let us make the elections that are coming forth great elections, at which great men and women will be given the opportunity to serve. I am not a Jewish prophet. I'm not related to any Jewish prophet. But I have the ability to see on the basis of extant evidence. Although I do not speak with the authority of the prophets, nor with their exactitude. But I can see that sometimes in the month of October, you will have a good election. I can see that in the month of October, you will elect men and women who will serve this country. But let me tell you, it is said just to say that no man can rule guiltlessly. Even when you have elected them, democracy is preserved by eternal vigilance. You must always be vigilant, because it is true that power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. You know, the Chinese have a saying that why is it that when a king retires, he does not put his so important crown on the head of his minister, he puts it on a nail. And the answer is, with the nail, there is no danger of the nail taking itself seriously. But when you put it on the head of a minister, he may very well take himself seriously and think he is the king. So power has an allure, power has an attraction, power opens doors, and it is only the very humble who have the ability to exercise power as if it was something entrusted to them. Ladies and gentlemen, what is the wisdom of speaking on and on while we know that the truth sits on our laps? Let us pause for a moment and ask ourselves going forward, what kind of Liberia do we want? And I'm suggesting to us, we want a great Liberia. We want a Liberia where there is food. We want a Liberia where there is good education. We want a Liberia where there is sound health. We want a Liberia where there is employment. We want a Liberia where young men and women and old men and women have the opportunity to serve their country. We want a Liberia which will be respected in Africa, a Liberia which will be respected in the world. And I'm suggesting to us that that Liberia is achievable if you young men and women want it. You are the midwife. Choose you now, whether you want to strangle the child or you want to nurture the child. Go out, therefore, into the 15 counties and do that which is good and right. Protect Liberia, preserve the Liberia, and give Liberia the leaders that she deserves. God bless.